Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for coming back to visit me. Thank you for being on your mat today. And today I'm going to answer a few questions that have come up on my social media, things that you're interested in. So I posted a question a while ago on social media. I'm creating content. What would you like me to talk about? And the number one question that came up was yoga and social justice. And as you know, I have been a proponent of linking yoga and social justice for quite some time. I call myself an accidental activist with an article that I wrote back in 2012, which was Yoga Isn't Just for Skinny White Girls. And of course, that title is clickbait. I go on to talk about how yoga really is for all of us and the assumptions people make about what a yoga body looks like, who gets to practice yoga, what spaces are yoga spaces. And the most important question that's come up for me lately who are the gatekeepers of yoga? And we've seen a lot of stuff kind of go on in the media with who gets to set yoga culture, who's really been the purveyors of yoga culture, who set the standard for what yoga culture looks like. And I think back in the 90s when we had huge publications like the biggest yoga publication, that switched gears and decided that they wanted to be more of a fashion magazine and less of a yoga magazine, and started creating yoga in the image and of the current beauty standard culture, which was very young, very fair skinned, very flexible, and creating these narratives around what a yogi looks like, right? That really excluded a large group of people and continued to do so over the years. So then people started getting interested in yoga as the population was aging, as we were becoming more and more and more stressed out, when more and more things are added to our plates, when we have less and less time. We may have beaten our bodies up in the 70s, 80s, and 90s with really hardcore exercise, and we needed to do something that really soothed our body, our mind, and our soul, so people started maybe gravitating toward yoga. I remember yoga really picked up steam in the early 90s when I think Madonna did a movie where she owned a yoga studio and also started opening her shows with yoga poses, and then there seemed to be a big surge in interest in yoga. And that always happens when pop culture or celebrities pick up a cause, and then the rest of us pick up the same kind of cause. And I noticed that shift from, I think, more exercise, because at the time I was a fitness instructor, and I noticed the shift away from like step aerobics and boot camp classes into yoga and stretch classes. And I thought that was really interesting because at the time I had been practicing yoga kind of in the background. And so when I started to see the shift, I also started to see who was showing up to yoga classes. And those people didn't look like me. You know, they weren't people of color, they weren't people of size. And yoga studios are predominantly in wealthier neighborhoods because the rent and to offer yoga is really expensive. So I get why yoga studios showed up where they were, but what I've seen happen with yoga has become almost this exclusive club for a long time, where certain people got to choose who would practice, and certain situations were created around who was allowed to practice, meaning if you had money, if you had access to a studio, if you had access to a teacher. And it became really difficult for people who really needed it to have access to it. And then it also felt very homogeneous because all the imagery around yoga, again, was very white, very flexible, very young, very wealthy. And there was a whole group of people who were like, oh, that's for that group of people, that's for white people. And it really became about this idea, a singular practice for our own worth and our own self-good, and it really lost its way from unity. It became a very singular practice around feeling good and not a practice around creating unity and connection with people. So that kind of hurt my heart because it was always those things for me. Even within fitness culture, it was always about community and coming together and supporting each other. So I started speaking out about it in 2012, and it's brought me to where I am today in terms of the Yoga for All movement, the Yoga for Everyone book, that has really, I hopefully made a dent or an impact in yoga culture now, that other people are sharing their experiences, other people are picking up the torch, which I absolutely love, and hopefully mainstream yoga culture is shifting in a way that is inclusive to all of us. But if we are going to have a collective experience around yoga, we have to remember that there are lots of people who are missing from the yoga experience. That when we look out in the world among us, who are we not seeing in yoga studios, and what are some of the barriers which we're not aware of that are keeping people away from our studios? One is the cost of yoga. It's extremely expensive, and sometimes if you're coming from a limited income, the opportunity to take a yoga class is hindered by the fact that yoga classes can be $25, $30, $40 for 1 hour. So how do we combat that? I love all the access to free yoga online. I love all the access to yoga in non-conventional spaces. How do we reach a group of people who already have a spiritual practice and feel that yoga is not for them, which we need to discuss? Like, how do we reach out to underserved communities who could use this practice as a way to either do community organizing, or to reach out to people who are struggling in the community, or to address health situations within the community, whether it's high blood pressure or, injury or anything like that. Like, how do we reach out to those communities without it looking like a charity, without certain people coming into those communities that don't look like people within those communities and offering yoga? We train people in those communities to practice yoga and to bring it back to the community in a way that is accessible to that particular community. So it may mean that we let go a little bit of tradition and create a safer brave space for those communities to practice that feels authentic to them. And lastly, how do we share yoga with everybody? How do we start looking, stepping away from companies or organizations that are not fostering inclusivity and diversity? Because in this world, diversity is fact. Inclusivity is a choice, and people have to decide who do they want to teach, why do they want to teach yoga, and how do we go about making this a practice that everybody feels welcome to be a part of, because we're still not there. We still really have a far way to go. So I'm going to continue to talk about this, continue to blog about this. I just want to touch on it in this video. It's a topic that is too broad and too deep for a 10 or 15 minute conversation. So if you're interested, check out our podcast, the Yoga for All podcast, where we dive into these conversations all the time. Also, I have a podcast called It's Not About Me. Dive into this conversation all the time. So this is just a shallower dive. If you're looking for a deeper dive, go ahead and check out my work on Yoga International, Yoga for All students, and even pick up my book, Yoga for Everyone, where I'm constantly addressing how do we democratize this practice, and how does this practice become about all of us. So if you are watching me on YouTube, please subscribe to my channel and hit the bell so that you can be notified when we upload a new video. We upload a new video every single Friday, and the video is really based on what you what you want to know, what you want to connect with. So please leave a comment, share, like, most importantly, subscribe. Talk to you soon.